Most people, when they buy a comic book, they look at the pictures and read the stories and enjoy it, but they don't give much thought, if any, to all the work that went into putting the book together. And I don't mean the writing and the drawing of the art. I wanted to discuss here the physical steps that you have to go through to put a comic book together. Today it's all done digitally on a computer, and that's a very easy, simple process compared to the way it was done in the good old days. This book we're looking at here is Americomics #1. This was done in 1983, and all the artwork, all the coloring that goes into coloring the book was done through making mechanical separations. Every color, see red, blue, yellow, using the color separation process, CMYK, which is what the printers designate. C stands for cyan, which is blue, Y is yellow, and M is magenta, which is commonly red. You have to put a combination of those three colors together to come up with the variety of colors you use in a comic book. The industry standard back in the 80s, and from the 30s through the 90s, I guess, was everything was done with mechanical separations, and it involved working on plastic acetate overlays, and the colors would be put on by coloring in on the acetate everything that was red. Then on another layer it would be everything that was yellow, and on a third layer everything that was blue. Now each of these three shades, these three colors, had two different shades, a 50% and a 25%, which was a screened version, making it lighter or darker. In order to get brown that we see here on the villain's leg, you would color in on the red overlay, the 100% red overlay, make that solid red, and then also on a yellow overlay, 100% yellow, to make a bright red. And then also you would go to a 25% blue and color that in to make it brown. So you had magenta, yellow, and blue together to make brown. The same thing on green over here on Captain Freedom. His combinations would be 100% yellow and 100% blue on the legs, and 100% yellow and 100% magenta to make the red. So when you look at a page in a comic book and you see all these different colors that are in it, each color is done on a separate piece of acetate, and it's a very complex, time-consuming process, as you could imagine. This is what we call a color guide. A color guide is where we take the black and white drawing and make a photocopy of it, and then take watercolors and then we paint the story the way we want the colors to be. If you look closely on this artwork, you can see that there are written codes that go into the artwork, and these codes indicate what colors are colored in on different overlays. In order to make this orange here, we used a 100% yellow and a 50% red, so we had to color in on two different overlays to make that orange. You have to get this straight in your mind. This is the way it looks like when you're doing an overlay. You start off, like I said, with a black and white image, okay? And then this is a Scarlet Scorpion, and this is just an overlay for the inside cover, so it's just really gray tones that we're indicating here. But you can see everywhere that it's been colored in red would print as the tone, or if we're doing a full color thing, I don't have a full color separation. anymore to show you, but his costume would be red, so you would color in everywhere on this overlay that you want it to be red. So you can see here, this is what the overlay looks like, and this would just be safe for the 100% red. You'd also have to do 8 more overlays to get the full 64 range color that was standard for comic books in this pre-digital era. So it was quite a lot of work that went into it. When you prepare a book to be printed, the pagination is very important. The art has to be assembled in the proper order for the book to be folded into a 32-page book, so that you have page 1 followed by page 2, etc., etc. So we made large art flats the size of this background sheet, where we had 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of black and white art pasted up like that, and then overlays with the plastic to color in the different colors. This went to the printer, and they shot this on a big process camera, negatives of each of the overlays. And in order to get the thing to come out correctly, you have to paste up the pages in a specific order. This is a 32-page book, so you paste up page 1 opposite page 32, so that when the whole thing is folded together, as I'll show you in a minute, it comes out in the proper order. And this would be the middle section, the centerfold, which would be page 16 opposite page 17. And like I said, this is how it comes out of the press. It's really 2 different big sheets of paper that are folded together. So it's a 2-signature printing, 2 16-page signatures. As you can see, it's rather involved. So this sheet of paper would be the center section, 1 signature, and then the other section is page, the first 8 pages and the last 8 pages. This is the 2 middle 8-page sections. So all this, you've seen old movies where they show you the press rooms in a newspaper storyline. They have these gigantic presses that are, go up 15 feet up into the ceiling, and they have these gigantic rolls of paper. I mean, higher than a man's head in circumference, and these big rolls of paper go through this machine, and it goes through 4 different sections for black, yellow, red, and blue ink, and all of it folds together, and what comes out the other end is this, and it comes out like click, 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 click. Each click is another book comes out. So the printer's job is to register all these colors together. When the art is prepared, as you can see here, there are registration marks up here. So there are registration marks put on every overlay, and it corresponds with the registration marks on the background plate. So they have to register 9 overlays to the base art, and each one of those is going to be on a different plate on the press. So while the press is running at that high rate of speed, they have to adjust the registration so that all the colors come out, so that it doesn't offset and it looks like it's supposed to look. I can show you examples. Everybody has had an old comic book where the coloring is off registration, and the red's hanging out, or the blue's hanging out, or all of it's hanging out. This particular book happens to be in very good registration, but anyways, It usually takes 4 men at least on this big press, and they're running around like crazy, adjusting the levels of the ink so that it's not too heavy on the blue, not too heavy on the red, or too light, and to get it in registration. And all this is while the machine is cranking and copies are coming out. The first printer I went to, the glossy first Americomics books, okay, this was done on a super big press. I was always there every time, every book that was printed through AC Comics, I stood there and watched it being printed. All those, hundreds and hundreds of books. They have to run a lot of paper to make ready for it to be in registration. And in this case, the first book we had printed was Fun Comics number 4. I watched as they filled a dumpster that I swear was like 8 feet high, filled with just waste paper. It took them that long and that much waste just to get the book in registration. One of the reasons why AC Comics has been in business for over 3 decades and has managed to survive through the ups and downs in the comic book industry is that most all of the what I call grunt work in the pre-press preparation of a comic book we did on our own. Mark Heike and I, we did it in-house. If we had outsourced all of this, it would have been incredibly expensive. For example, just to print this cover of Americomics number 1, at the time we had one printer would print the guts in a 32-page section, then it would go to another printer who would print the covers. And just the cover alone on this book cost $12,000. It's a fraction of that today, but in the old days that's what it cost because it was that expensive. So in order to cut costs and do it all ourselves, I had to buy equipment which we had on the premises in the AC office so that we could do the work ourselves. As you know, if you're a comic book fan, artwork is done larger than the print size. The standard size for artwork today is 11 inches by 17. This is an example of full bleed art for a recent issue of Femforce. It has to be put into the platen on a huge camera, which is called a process camera, and shot into a negative, which is then turned into a black and white stat, which is pasted up to do the color separations as I described in the earlier section here. Process camera is a huge thing. It's like 5 feet tall by maybe 6 or 7 feet long and 3 feet wide, and it has to be that big because the size of the negatives that are shot in the camera are huge. Okay, so not only do we have to have a camera that would accommodate these big negatives, we had to have a processor to process the negatives and all the accompanying paper cutters and staplers and all that it took to put the books together. Here's an example of a negative that was actually shot on that process camera. The process camera has been discarded years ago when the digital era came in. The camera was so big, it was in, I guess, 4 different locations while we were doing AC Comics over the last 35 or so years. The office that I'm in now, we actually had to put the camera in place and build the room around it because it was so big. And when we got rid of the camera, we had to actually disassemble it to haul it out to the dumpster. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. It was a 2-step process. You would put negative film into the back of the camera, and I'll show you pictures of what the camera looked like. And you would get out a piece of paper which you would run through a processor, and it would give you a negative image like this. Then you had to sandwich that with another piece of paper, run it through the processor, and it would offset the negative image and turn it into a positive image. And then the positive image is what we would work with when we did our paste up and our color guides and all that. So there's many steps that went into making a comic book that we don't have to do now because everything can be done on your home computer, and it can be done just a fraction of the time with a fraction of the cost. The process I just described of shooting the images through the process camera had to be done for every page of every comic book that AC Comics ever did. Here's an example of a printed cover. And as you can see, one of the ways that we saved a lot of money was we ganged several covers onto one sheet of paper. In other words, it cost X number of dollars to have this sheet of paper printed. So it was to my advantage to have as many different covers that would fit on this piece of paper at one time. So we quite often had a common back cover. So the Film Force 118 here shared the same back cover with Fighting Yank number 5 here. See, we printed the back cover sideways so it would work with either one of the covers. And you can see how tightly everything is packed together here. So we were able to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different covers on this one sheet of paper. And then the back side was always printed just in black and white, and that's where we usually put ads for the other books. So it's one cost-saving step that I think the AC did that I don't believe other companies did or maybe never even thought of. Okay, here's a color key I found that will give you an example of how the overlays were done, sort of. This is a press proof. In other words, before we go to press, in this case for the cover printing, the printer would deliver this proof to me, and I would look at it, and I would see that all the colors are the way they're supposed to be, and if something was wrong, then we would make a notation on it, and then they would fix it on the negative before the book was printed. So in this case, we're doing Dragonfly number 2 and Power Plays number 2, and even though there's only 4 overlays, this is a composite. I'm try to do this so I don't see the glare on it. This will show you what I mean about how the overlays go together to make a picture. Okay, that's the finished registered Dragonfly, and each color is on a separate overlay. Okay, there's the red and yellow together. That's just the yellow. There's the yellow and the red. There's the yellow, red, and blue. And then you drop on the black and you get the finished image all in registration. So this is what we had to go through. Literally thousands of different images, countless thousands, I guess, over 35 years, went into doing all these comic books. And like I said, Mark and I did almost all of it ourselves. This is a different kind of a proof, which is a composite of the negatives. It's called a chromalin proof. It's a more expensive process, but it's really nice. Like these look nice framed. It's on very heavy paper, and this is the way it looks in good registration with all the colors correct. Notation up here that this chromalin proof has to be returned to the printer in order to get it right when they run it through the press. Okay, here's another chromalin. This is actually Film Force number 1, front cover, back cover, and Dragonfly number 1, front cover and back cover. Here's an example of some of the oversized artwork that had to be dealt with. Obviously we couldn't handle it unless we had a big process camera, because this artwork, this is for the Sin Special, that beautiful art that Mark Heike did. It's so oversized, you know, it had to be done on a huge camera. And the photo negatives and the photostatic paper that we used in that camera was very, very expensive, as were the chemicals. So, I mean, all this can be done for like nothing on a computer today, but back in the old days it was very expensive and very time consuming. It all had to be done in the dark on the big process camera, so I would have to usually work at night and with a red safe light on, and I'd spend hours in the dark shooting all these pages. So I hope you guys appreciate what we had to go through to bring you AC Comics back in the old days. Now we can just sit on our butts in front of a computer and it's real easy. But here's an example of Eric Larson Film Force Sentinels of Justice piece that was used as a promotional poster. When we were going to do the FemForce movie, actress Sharon Blair, sweetheart, beautiful lady, she had photographs taken of her by a professional photographer in a photo studio, and he shot them on 2 1/4 color transparencies and sent them to me. Well, back in those days, it was very expensive. It cost $100 to have one of those images made into a printable negative, so we only could use one of the things that she did. You don't think about what expense was back then. And I know Greg Horn did this fabulous painting of Nightville, and he did it. It was like, I don't know, maybe a 3 foot by 4 foot painting. It was huge. In those days, the only way you could get a color separation done was to put it on a drum scanner, which meant that the artwork had to be flexible so that it could bend around a drum, and then the laser would scan as the drum rotated, and that's how you got the image. And this is, again, a very expensive process, at least $100 a shot. So that's why we didn't use Greg's cover, and we just used it recently because we could do it digitally with a little digital camera. So anyways, that's part of the process. To show you that what we went through is what Marvel and DC and everybody else did, was the same process. Here's an example of a Gil Kane Ghost Rider. They call him Knight Rider in this version. You can see the registration marks and the different colored notations on this black and white stat of the black and white artwork. And again, overlays would be put on this to color it by hand to generate the finished comic book. And I thought you might like to see this. This is an example of a 1949 book as it came off of the press. Back in those days, it has been cut so that it does open up. But this is a copy of Prize Western Comics from 1949. And if you look here, let's see if we can get into this. You can see how the color registration is off here. This is before, and this should have been a make-ready thrown away, because this shows you how the blue is out of registration. The red and the yellow seems to be okay, but the blue is definitely out of registration. So I thought I'd share this with you. A genuine antique. These things have become collector's items. Even the color guides. But you know, this is a piece of history that you know, I'm amazed that it's survived all this time. In this video, I wanted to show some of the many additional steps that it took to produce AC Comics back at the beginning. Mark Heike and I did most all of this in addition to editing, art, and story. If it all didn't get done in 30 days, the book would be canceled. Thus the title, 30 Day Doom.